Have you noticed recent moments of hush that feel less like boredom and more like invitation, as if life itself were pausing, waiting for you to listen beneath the usual chatter? Perhaps TV is on and emails flash across your screen, yet somewhere inside, a deeper current asks you to slow down. Carl Jung would say this inner tug is not random. He called it the summons to individuation, the quiet threshold each of us must cross when the ego's toolkit has reached its limit, and the soul is ready for something wider, wilder, and infinitely more alive. Individuation is not self-improvement in the way magazines promise thinner bodies or sharper resumes. It is the sacred art of remembering the person you were before the world told you who to be. Picture a seed that has slept all winter in dark soil. It does not bloom because someone shouts at it to grow. It blooms because light beckons through the darkness, and the seed obeys its own hidden timetable. In the same way, your longing for silence, your sudden disinterest in surface thrills, and your gentle curiosity about dreams or symbols, and these are rays of light reaching down to the dormant seed of your deeper self. They signal that the season of germination is ending, and the season of blooming is at hand. In this video, we will walk through 7 subtle yet unmistakable signs that your soul is preparing to unfold its petals. You may discover that what you mistook for fatigue is actually the body's way of clearing space for intuition, or that a recent surge of creativity is not a hobby, but an inner river breaking through old dams. Each sign is a milestone on the path from restless striving to rooted presence. If even one resonates, know that you have already set foot on the spiral journey home to yourself. So settle in, perhaps with a notebook or simply an open heart, and let these indicators serve as mirrors for your own quiet evolution. The stillness you feel is not empty. It is pregnant with possibility. Your soul is stirring, and the garden within you is ready to bloom. There often comes a moment, unexpected and soft, when the very things that once animated your calendar begin to lose their flavor. It might be a lively dinner party that leaves you drained instead of delighted, or a career win that, instead of sparking celebration, feels curiously hollow. You sit in your car after the applause fades, and the silence doesn't feel lonely. It feels honest. This is not apathy, this is awakening. Something deep inside is stirring, and for the first time in years, the stillness is saying more than the noise ever did. Many people in their midlife reach this turning point without warning. You might wake up on a Saturday and feel no rush to scroll, to plan, to produce. The urgency to prove something slowly gives way to a curiosity about simply being. There is a new kind of hunger, not for stimulation, but for substance. You begin turning off the background noise, not just literally, but emotionally. Shallow conversations feel tiring. Social performances feel distant. What you crave now is quiet, not because you are tired of life, but because you are finally ready to hear it speak. This inner silence is not the absence of thought, it is the presence of depth. In Jungian terms, this is the ego loosening its grip and the self beginning to rise. The self does not shout. It whispers through symbols, nudges, and small tears that come without warning. You may find yourself gazing out the window longer, feeling moved by a piece of music that once seemed ordinary, or sensing a longing for something you cannot yet name. This is the voice of your deeper being making itself known. It does not want you to abandon the world. It wants you to re-enter it from a more rooted, authentic center. Healing begins when you stop confusing distraction with joy. Stillness becomes sacred when you realize it is not emptiness, but the space where truth finally echoes. One woman described sitting by the ocean alone for the first time in a decade. She had always feared silence, but in that hour, she said, She met a version of herself she hadn't known since childhood. Quiet, watchful, deeply alive. This is how the blooming starts, not with a roar, but with a hush. When the external world fades just enough for your inner world to be heard, the petals of transformation begin to part. Listen. Your soul is not withdrawing, it is preparing to speak. The realization often dawns in the middle of ordinary success. A promotion letter arrives, a new car sits gleaming in the driveway, and applause echoes after a well-executed presentation. And instead of elation, you feel a faint emptiness that will not be reasoned away. The trophies of your younger ambitions suddenly resemble props left behind after a play, meaningful only while the spotlight was on. At first, you may label this feeling as burnout, but look closer and you will sense something far more hopeful. The soil of your priorities is turning, making room for a deeper seed to push through. Imagine David, a 48-year-old architect who once measured his worth by square footage and magazine spreads. For years he rose before dawn, fueled by coffee and accolades, sketching skylines that made investors smile. One night, returning from an awards gala, he placed his newest crystal plaque on a shelf and felt nothing. The silence in his living room was thick. On impulse, he opened an old sketchbook from college, pages filled not with glossy towers, but with charcoal drawings of quiet courtyards and human-scaled homes. His chest tightened, not from regret, but from recognition. The passion that once burned bright for status had cooled, revealing a gentler flame for spaces that nurture community rather than ego. In that moment he understood. His longing had outgrown its old container. This shift is not the death of ambition, it is its refinement. Jung wrote that the first half of life is for establishing the ego, while the second is for serving the soul. When former goals lose their glitter, it signals that your psyche is crossing that midpoint bridge. You find yourself asking different questions. Instead of, how high can I climb, you wonder, how real can I become? Instead of, will they approve, you ask, will this nourish? These inquiries mark the shedding of an outdated identity and the emergence of a truer calling. As the hollow feeling grows impossible to ignore, you may notice practical changes. Shopping sprees feel tedious. Networking events feel contrived. You begin carving out time for pursuits that once seemed frivolous. Gardening, poetry, volunteering at an animal shelter, activities that speak to something tender and timeless within you. Friends might say, you've changed, but what they're witnessing is not a loss of drive. It is a redistribution of energy from applause to authenticity. Healing comes when you honor this emptiness as sacred space rather than rushing to fill it. Give your soul permission to grieve the persona it no longer wishes to animate. Create a ritual to release an old goal, perhaps writing a farewell letter to the version of you who chased it so fiercely. Then listen for faint stirrings of new desire. They may appear as a sudden curiosity about herbal medicine, or an urge to study a language you loved as a child. Trust these whispers. They are breadcrumbs leading you home. The climax of this sign arrives when action follows insight. David eventually proposed a pro bono project, designing community gardens in underserved neighborhoods. The project paid nothing in dollars, but everything in meaning. He felt a quiet exhilaration building, a legacy the ego could never have conceived. In that same way, when your old desires fall silent, do not mourn their passing. Celebrate the clearing they leave behind. For in that fertile emptiness, your soul is already planting the next true chapter of your life. It often begins when the rational mind can no longer explain the timing of events. You think of an old friend, and they call within minutes. A book practically falls off the shelf with the exact message you needed to hear. You wake from a vivid dream, heart racing, carrying a symbol you do not yet understand, but it lingers like a sacred echo. These are not random occurrences. According to Jung, they are the psyche's secret language. Dreams, intuitions, and synchronicities. They are not there to be solved, but to be honored, for they are the soul's quiet way of revealing what words cannot say. For many, this awakening to subtle guidance feels like a return. Like Maya, a 52-year-old nurse who began experiencing intense, symbolic dreams after her children left for college. In one recurring dream, she stood at a crossroads, barefoot, watching two wild horses gallop toward different horizons. By day, she could not shake the image. She began journaling and noticed her intuition sharpened. At work, she found herself saying exactly what a grieving patient needed before they even spoke. In the grocery store, she overheard a stranger quote a line from a poem her mother used to read. These synchronicities did not make her feel crazy, they made her feel seen. Jung called this mysterious unfolding individuation. As the ego softens, the unconscious sends symbols to guide us toward wholeness. A crow in a dream might point to shadow work. A sudden fascination with music could invite emotional expression. Intuition begins to operate like an inner compass, gently nudging us away from what drains and toward what heals. This process does not come from the intellect, but from something deeper, a remembering of who you truly are. You may find that logic loses its grip. Decisions once made with spreadsheets now rest in the hands of a quiet knowing. You feel drawn to certain people without reason, or repelled by situations that make sense on paper. This is not irrationality, it is soul logic, and it requires trust. Unlike ego-driven plans, this path is not predictable. It unfolds moment by moment, symbol by symbol, feeling by feeling. The climax of this sign is surrender, not in defeat, but in reverence. You stop trying to analyze every outcome. You begin asking different questions. What is this trying to teach me? What is my intuition saying? You light a candle before sleeping, inviting dreams to speak. You carry a journal to record odd patterns, songs, or numbers that keep repeating. Over time, a narrative emerges, not linear, but true. Not loud, but alive. When you embrace this symbolic conversation with life, you no longer feel alone. You sense something walking beside you, within you, quietly orchestrating your evolution. And while it may not provide all the answers, it offers something more precious, a feeling that you are guided, connected, and becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Now the real question arises. If your dreams are messages, your intuition a compass, and your synchronicities signs along the path, what are they preparing you for? Perhaps the answer lies deeper still. For when the soul begins to bloom, it often first brings the buried back to the surface, not to harm you, but to heal. It often catches you off guard. One ordinary morning, a song brings tears you cannot explain. A scent stirs a memory you thought was long buried. A conversation echoes the same rejection you felt as a child. These are not random. They are the return of your shadow, not to punish you, but to be finally seen. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply the unloved, unintegrated parts of you calling for your attention. And in this blooming stage, something within you changes. You stop recoiling in shame. You begin to listen. Take Adam, a 47-year-old father who had spent decades hiding his vulnerability behind sarcasm and ambition. After a quiet moment on a weekend hike, he felt a wave of grief crash through him. He had spent his life performing strength, but had never mourned his own father's emotional absence. Instead of pushing the feeling away, he sat on the trail, and let the tears come. He didn't need answers. He needed release. That moment became a turning point. He started meditating each morning, not to fix anything, but to be with whatever arose: rage, sadness, longing. And in that space of presence, his heart softened. This is the gift of shadow work. It is not about reliving trauma or labeling yourself broken. It is about creating a sacred space inside where every exiled emotion, every disowned trait, can return home. You begin to recognize that the fear you once projected onto others was your own, that the anger that startled you was simply a boundary you never learned to set, that the loneliness you carried was not a flaw, but a wound waiting for your warmth. Jung believed that the moment we turn toward our shadow is the moment healing begins. Because what you can finally name, you can finally tame. You learn to say, "I see you," to the parts that once terrified you. You stop needing to hide behind perfection or people-pleasing. You no longer chase love as a way to escape yourself. You become your own safe place. And here is where the magic unfolds. The more you befriend your darkness, the more light becomes available to you. You start to feel lighter, more honest, and less drained by pretending. You feel a sense of quiet pride, not because you have conquered your past, but because you have faced it with courage. You start to trust your own capacity to hold pain without collapsing, to feel deeply without drowning. This is not the end of the journey, it is the turning point. When you stop running from your past, you begin walking toward yourself. And what was once seen as weakness, sensitivity, tears, and fears becomes the soil in which your soul begins to bloom. Healing is not about becoming new, it is about becoming whole. And it always begins with the part of you that hurts the most asking, "Will you stay?" And you, for the first time, answering, "Yes." Sometimes the longing for company fades without warning, like a party whose music suddenly seems too loud for the conversation you want to have. One afternoon, you find yourself turning down an invitation that once felt exciting, choosing instead a slow walk by the river or an evening wrapped in candlelight and quiet pages. The silence restores you in ways applause never did. This is not isolation, it is a reunion. Jung would say your soul is gathering its scattered pieces, calling them back from the noise to sit beside the hearth of your own being. Evelyn, a 49-year-old marketing director, felt this shift after years of networking events and client lunches. She noticed that chatter about quarterly targets left her strangely empty, while an hour alone in a botanical garden filled her with soft electricity. She began blocking out soul appointments on her calendar. Mornings spent journaling by a window, evening walks under city lights with no earbuds, simply listening to her breath. Friends worried she was withdrawing. Evelyn smiled, knowing she was actually arriving, perhaps for the first time. In solitude, you start to hear layers of yourself that group settings drown out. The rush of ideas, the echo of old memories, the hush of intuitive nudges. All become clear. Small talk feels tiring because it skims the surface when you are ready to dive into deeper water. You are not rejecting people, you are rejecting emptiness. You crave conversations where eyes soften, pauses lengthen, and truths emerge without rehearsal. Until those moments appear, you are content to keep company with your own unfolding. This spaciousness has a healing rhythm. When the nervous system is no longer scrambling to impress or belong, the body exhales. Creativity reawakens. You find yourself humming while cooking, sketching in margins, or rearranging furniture so your rooms feel like sanctuaries rather than storage units for obligations. Solitude becomes an elixir that realigns your inner compass. You sense what to say yes to, what to release, and how to honor the quiet instructions of your heart. Contrary to old fears, meaningful relationships do not diminish when you embrace solitude. They refine. You show up with more presence because you no longer arrive depleted. Friends who value depth lean closer, drawn by your grounded energy. Those who thrive on drama drift away, finding less fuel for their fires. You grieve some goodbyes, yet even the sadness feels honest, free of resentment. The climax of this sign is a tender revelation. You are never truly alone when you are at home within yourself. In the hush, you hear the pulse of something vast, the same current that sends waves to shore and buds to blossom. You realize solitude is not absence, but presence, amplified. As you grow comfortable in your own company, a new sensitivity awakens. You begin to sense the emotions others hide behind smiles and routines. Their pain no longer threatens you. It invites compassion. This gentle, perceiving heart is the doorway to our next sign, where empathy deepens and love expands beyond personal need. There comes a moment in your awakening when you stop taking things personally, not out of apathy, but because you see with new eyes. You begin to notice the subtle tremble in someone's voice when they insist they're fine, the flicker of fear behind a harsh comment, the loneliness disguised as sarcasm. Where you once might have snapped back or shut down, now you pause. You soften. Something in you recognizes something in them. It is not pity, it is communion. This is the quiet power of a heart that has been cracked open and now sees through masks instead of being fooled by them. At 42, Malik had always prided himself on being emotionally tough. He ran a business, raised 2 boys, and never cried. But after a series of losses, including his father's death and the end of a 20-year marriage, he found himself strangely attuned to others' grief. A barista's forced smile, a colleague's irritated tone. He began to sense pain beneath their surface. One afternoon, instead of brushing off a friend's passive-aggressive comment, he simply asked, "What's hurting today?" The friend broke down. Malik didn't offer advice. He just sat there, present, without needing to fix it. And something profound happened. Both men felt seen. This ability to see beneath the mask is not weakness, it is maturity. Jung believed that when we do our own shadow work, we stop projecting and start perceiving. We stop needing to armor up against other people's pain, because it no longer echoes an unhealed wound within us. Our boundaries become less about walls and more about resonance. We naturally move toward what is real and gentle, and away from what is performative or manipulative. In this space, empathy becomes sacred. You no longer feel superior for being more healed, or bitter toward those still hiding. You understand that everyone is carrying something, even those who smile the widest. And instead of adding to their weight, you bring presence. Sometimes it's a kind glance, a silent prayer, or just not interrupting when someone needs to speak their pain aloud. These small moments matter. They are medicine. This sign marks the emergence of transpersonal love, the love that sees beyond personality and touches the soul. It asks for nothing in return. It does not chase, convince, or possess. It simply meets people where they are, with the quiet understanding that everyone is on a journey. And in this, your relationships shift. They become less about roles and more about resonance. Less about fixing and more about witnessing. This depth of connection creates a ripple. Your presence becomes healing. Your words carry weight. Your silence, even, holds space for truth. And just as the heart opens to others, something wild and ancient stirs within you. The soul, no longer silenced by ego or survival, begins to press outward. You feel a pull to express, to create, to birth what has been quietly gestating in the dark. This leads us to the final sign, the awakening of creative fire. Sometimes, the shift begins with a whisper, a journal dusted off, a guitar picked up again, or a sudden urge to plant a garden. There is no grand plan, no promise of applause, just a quiet urgency, rising from somewhere deep inside. You are not trying to impress anyone, you are trying to breathe. This is not the kind of creativity taught in schools. It is a sacred expression. It does not come from the mind, but from the marrow. It is the soul's way of saying, "Let me speak, let me bloom." At 51, Elena found herself waking at dawn with poems forming uninvited in her chest. She had never written poetry before. She was a nurse, practical, methodical. But after a silent divorce and a year of solitude, something within her demanded to be voiced. She began writing, not to publish, not to share, but to survive. Each line felt like a confession and a liberation. Eventually she joined a local writing circle. There she read one of her pieces aloud and wept, not because others clapped, but because she had finally honored what had been buried inside her for decades. Jung believed that true creativity is not ego-driven. It emerges when the conscious and unconscious begin to dialogue. When you have done the work to soften the ego and embrace the shadow, something new becomes possible. You are no longer censoring yourself to fit in. You are not trying to build a brand. You are answering a call that only you can hear. This is archetypal energy moving through you, the same force that moves the seasons, births the stars, and stirs the tides. Your blooming might not look like a gallery or a stage. It could be the way you redesign your kitchen, tell bedtime stories, or care for your garden with reverence. It could be how you turn grief into song, pain into paint, or silence into sculpture. What matters is not the form, but the authenticity. You are not living anymore, you are participating in it. This creative force is not a reward, it is a return, a reunion with the part of you that never stopped believing, never stopped dreaming, even when life got loud and love got lost. When this energy flows, you are not merely creating art, you are creating yourself, and that is the most beautiful thing of all. There comes a moment on the inner journey when you realize you are no longer chasing healing, you are living it. You are no longer seeking signs outside of yourself because they have begun to blossom within. The restlessness that once kept you running now softens into quiet knowing. The ache for validation dissolves into a deeper presence. You are not the same person you were a year ago, not because you forced change, but because you allowed it. Carl Jung taught that transformation happens not by rejecting who we were, but by reclaiming the parts of ourselves we forgot. Blooming is not the absence of darkness. It is the quiet courage to grow roots in it, to let the shadows speak, to let your silence become strength, and to know, without explanation, that peace is the first language of the soul's awakening. This peace you feel now is not passive, it is powerful. It is the absence of chaos, not because life is suddenly perfect, but because you no longer need the noise to feel alive. You no longer betray your truth for belonging. You no longer abandon your soul to meet someone else's timeline. This is not detachment. It is devotion to the real you, to the voice you buried, to the self that waited. You are blooming, not like a firework, but like a moonflower. Soft, sacred, seen only by those who slow down enough to witness. And the world will feel different, not because it changed, but because you finally did. You returned to your wholeness. You stopped measuring your worth through other people's mirrors. You began to breathe from the center of your being. So if these signs are stirring in you, trust them. You are not late. You are right on time. The chaos was never punishment. It was preparation. Every loss, every silence, every shadow was fertilizing the soil of your soul. And now, quietly, steadily, unmistakably, you are blooming. Not for the world's applause, but for the truth of your own becoming. Let it be gentle. Let it be real. Let it be you. If this message stirred something inside you, don't stop here. The next video will take you deeper into healing, growth, and self-discovery. It might just be the breakthrough your soul has been waiting for. Tap into it now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community committed to truth, transformation, and real inner change. You're not alone on this path. I'll meet you in the following video, where we continue becoming who we were always meant to be.